This second PowerPoint on the practices of Christianity looks at the role of the church and the local community. First of all, what is the church? Well, the church is not just a building. Obviously, Christians refer to church as a building, and we also talk about cathedrals or chapels. But really the church comes from a Greek word which is ecclesia, which means assembly or gathering. And this basically means the church is all the Christian people as one or in a group. They may meet in a church, a building, but they could also meet in a tent, in a home. So really the church is not just referring to a physical structure. Today the church is a community that mostly meet on Sunday for services. However, the church is now very active in most local communities, and they provide support for local schools, they provide support for local charities and families who are in need in their local community. They may run youth groups, they may set up support and advice for people who are in need, they may pray for people in hospitals, they may provide opportunities for people with food banks, or in schools offering reading time for busy teachers. Indeed, it's the food banks that is one area that the church has become perhaps most famous for in recent years. One of the key passages in the Bible that supports this is Matthew 25:35 to 36. Here there is a clear indication of the mission of the church to care for the poor in the local community. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. This is a clear statement of the mission of the church in the community to support those who are most in need, to clothe those who have no clothes, to care for those who are sick, to support those in prison, to feed those who are hungry. And it is a clear message that those Christians who don't do this will fall below the standards expected of God. One other famous parable which explains this is the parable of the sheep and the goats. This is a production of the whole parable, and I don't expect you to learn it by any means, but the essential message of the parable, if you read it, is that there are two types of people. There are sheep and there are goats, and the sheep are the ones who the shepherd, who in this case is God, sets to one side and cares for, and the goats are those who are not part of the shepherd's plan. And what here we have is a message which is clear, is that if you want God to bless you, you need to be a sheep, not a goat. You need to take steps in your own community, in your school, in your home, in your family, to do something to help others in need. One well-known organisation that is mentioned in some textbooks is the Trussell Trust. This was founded in 1997, and it provides food banks to people in crisis in the UK. A large number of people, particularly post-2008 and the austerity crisis, are reliant on food banks to provide an addition to their weekly food bill. These banks provide food for anyone, whether they are a Christian or not. They don't make any judgment about why you've gone. They often have a system where you have a token and you might have to discuss your needs before you get a token. And they're often supported by counsellors and those who will support people and help them get back on their feet. I mean, for example, the Trussell Trust often have doctors and social workers or dietitians and lawyers who are available in the drop-in centres for people to talk to. And you can find out more about that if you look at the website that I suggest. Another project you may want to refer to in your exam is the Oasis Project. This was set up by a evangelical Christian called Steve Chalk. It is now a national charity, and it runs schools, churches, food banks, community projects, and it also provides support for new mums, the elderly, the unemployed, and the mentally and physically ill. Most of the work of the Oasis Project is in the UK, but it does do some work abroad too, and this is a growing part of its mission. Once again, if you want to know more about the Oasis Project, there are some really good sites on YouTube. Another way the church engages with the community is through the Street Pastor program. This is a particularly interesting program in that it actually involves people going out and engaging with people at their most vulnerable and sometimes their most aggressive and loud. They go into cities and towns at peak periods on Saturday evenings, for example, and offer support and help to people who might be in some difficulty, maybe because they're drunk or because they have lost their friends or they've lost their money and they may need immediate support. It was set up by a man called Reverend Isaac in 2003, and now they're found all over the world, but they have a particular plant in the UK. Once again, street pastors can be seen in action on various YouTube sites, and I point you in the direction of the two that I see in the slide. If you want a Catholic example, you could look at the St. Vincent and de Paul Society. The SVP is a Roman Catholic group. It was recognised by the Prime Minister recently as offering outstanding community service. Founded in the 19th century by a French professor, they work with the elderly, the homeless, the sick and the lonely in the UK. They also set up schools and youth clubs and work with Christians or non-Christians. One other area that the church gets involved with is parish nursing. These are not qualified nurses necessarily. They may be, but they don't have to be. And it's a church-based scheme. People essentially offer to be voluntarily placed in a community project where they might meet with the elderly or the ill and offer simple support and care. Their training is paid for by the church and sometimes their salary too, but they're not part of the NHS. So, for example, they may visit an elderly person and talk to them about their loneliness, or they may provide them with simple medical advice, such as reading instructions on complicated medical documents or helping them to understand an operation or a procedure. They don't give drugs, and neither do they give out injections, but they do give time and they are able to talk to people. They're also, of course, available to offer advice as to where to go instead, so they may have access to lots of professionals who they can point people in the right direction. The church has always had a mission or evangelism message. Evangelism is essentially the idea that you should go out into the community and encourage other people to become Christians. The church grows by promoting the message of Christianity. As it says on the slide in Matthew 28:19-20, Jesus said this: "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always to the end of the age." One of the first people who were involved in evangelism were the disciples, and two of the most famous are Peter and Andrew. But even today, there are many Christians who want to share their faith and talk to others about the church. One very famous introduction to Christian course is the Alpha course. This is now worldwide, but it was set up in 1977 in London at a church called Holy Trinity Brompton. It was revised and given a sort of reboot in the 1990s by Nicky Gumbel, who is also from Holy Trinity Brompton. Essentially, how it operates is that there are a series of talks, often led by the priest or by a Christian who is involved in promoting the idea. And the talk is an open talk where they talk about various aspects of faith, who Jesus is, what the point of faith is, what the church is, how one should respond to the problems of the world. And combined with the talk, there will often be a meal provided by the church that people share, and they have a group discussion, and they basically offer support for new Christians or people thinking about the church. Alphas run all over the place. They run in schools, in prisons, in hospitals. They run in universities, in churches. They run in cafes, all over the place. And they're all very different. Some are charismatic in the sense that they will promote the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Others are more conservative. But they're all free, and they normally all provide a talk, some food, and some chat. There are about 2.5 billion Christians in the world, but of course many Christians now are what we call nominal Christians. They are Christians in the sense that they claim to be Christians on a census, but they don't really have an active weekly commitment to the church. And the church is trying hard with organisations like Alpha to reach out to new people in new communities. For example, evangelism now happens in football grounds or in supermarkets and in the great big temples of shopping such as Bluewater. Sometimes there are church services on Sunday in those places, and sometimes church services are shifted from Sunday to Monday or Thursday or Wednesday evenings to suit the needs of different people. But the numbers of Christians in Africa, China, Russia and South America and the Far East are actually growing, and growing very fast indeed. I mean, for example, China, we see thousands of new Christians coming to faith every year. Russia and the Russian Orthodox Church, freed from the barriers to its development by communism, has boomed, and there are now thousands of more Christians in Russia. But in the USA and Europe there has been a slow decline, and in the Middle East many Christians are persecuted, and that's a real cause for concern. In China alone, for example, there are more likely by the end of 2020 to be more Christians living there than anywhere else in the world. The same could be true of Poland and Ukraine. And the UK has also got a very fast growing Catholic population. This is largely due to the immigration of European Union immigrants, so Poles, Romanians, Bulgarians. They brought their Catholic faith to England, and Catholic churches which were once dwindling are now finding that they're having to do 1 or maybe even 2 services a day to compensate for the demand. And we're now in a situation where we also evangelize abroad. The UK has always sent missionaries abroad to places like Africa, and that continues. One organisation which is a youth-driven organisation is called YWAM, or Youth of the Mission, and they are an international organisation of volunteers, normally people between the ages of sort of 15 and 25, and they provide evangelical mission programs which operate across the world. They also, through things like gap year projects, offer aid and infrastructure building projects in poorer areas, both in the UK and worldwide. And as you can see, there are around 40,000 students who are trained every year worldwide by YWAM to work in projects in their local area or in nearby foreign countries. They also are finding themselves increasingly working with the new refugees that have come about due to the increase in migration from the Middle East and Africa to Europe. One of the things that's a sad fact of the 21st century is that Christians are now 4 times more likely to be persecuted than anybody else. Its mission to develop its project around the world has put Christianity into conflict, and many Christians are now finding themselves being extremely negatively oppressed. As it says on the slide, in 2012 there were persecution of Christians in 132 countries. Christians are often persecuted by not being able to get good jobs. Their homes may be attacked, their businesses may be persecuted or prejudiced against, and some Christians are even arrested and killed. One of the things that Christianity is very keen to promote is also reconciliation. The idea of reconciliation is essentially this idea that we should work to reconcile ourselves to people who've hurt us. And this is because one of the key messages of Christianity is forgiveness. Jesus stresses time and time again the importance of forgiveness. We're all encouraged to forgive those who hurt us and to try to reconcile broken friendships and relationships. Christians believe that Jesus' death on the cross allows us to accept God's forgiveness for ignoring him. And indeed, one of the sacraments of the Catholic Church, the sacrament of penitence and reconciliation, is very important. There are 2 big famous reconciliation programs which have been led by the Church. The one is the Irish, which is basically the reconciliation of Catholic and Protestant divide in Northern Ireland. And the second is the South African reconciliation movement after apartheid. Both of these can be looked at as examples of reconciliation that you can include in an exam. The Church has also historically been involved in alleviating world poverty, and there are a number of very well-known Christian charities which offer international relief. CAFOD is the Catholic charity, Tearfund is an evangelical charity, and Christian Aid is a Christian charity which is across all denominations. You need to know something about one of them in your exam, so I'm going to talk about Tearfund. And Tearfund was essentially a small organisation set up in 1960 to help alleviate the suffering of refugees who had fled their homes due to warfare. The money raised came from small evangelical churches, part of the Evangelical Alliance. And it grew so big that in 1968 they set up a separate charity, a separate organisation called Tearfund. And they are now one of the UK's largest charities operating in both the UK and overseas. Because it's an evangelical charity, they do promote Christian values and actively promote the gospel wherever they go. They often pray with people. But they also set up very successful and long-standing projects and help a lot of young Christians engage with those in real need through gap year projects. They often plant new churches or support old churches. They provide support to teachers in schools. They provide support to medics by sending out trainee doctors and trainee nurses to work with hospitals and clinics. They may build infrastructure projects working with local firms, providing support and finance. And they've most recently got involved in promoting an end to the human trafficking problem that dominates the world. In the exam, you really only need to know the work of one of these charities and how Christians respond to world poverty. So whether you choose Tearfund or CAFOD or Christian Aid, it doesn't matter, as long as you have some basic facts that you can discuss in your answers.